I knew something was off when I came home to find a puddle forming near my driveway. At first, I thought it was a sprinkler leak until I stepped into it, and my boot sank 3 inches into a soft, muddy crater. I followed the water trail around the side of my house and nearly lost it when I saw what had actually happened. Someone had taken a shovel to the ground beside my water main. And not just poked around, no, they'd gone full backyard archaeologist. The pipe was cracked clean through, gushing water like a busted fire hydrant. My lawn looked like a swamp, and I could already hear the meter spinning on my utility bill. That's when I caught the faint scent of lavender and entitlement on the breeze. "Keith," I heard behind me. I turned around slowly, already knowing who it was. You can't just plant unapproved shrubs right above utility lines. I had no choice. There she was, Beverly Prescott, the HOA's self-appointed vice president and full-time menace. "You what?" I said, trying not to raise my voice. "You dug up my yard." "I didn't dig it up," she said, nose high. "I supervised while my nephew did it. We have authority under Section 3.2 of the Community Beautification Code. That bush was a hazard." "There was no hazard. It's a dwarf holly." "It's been there for 2 years." "Well, it wasn't approved," she said, brushing invisible lint off her pastel cardigan. "And now you've learned why it's important to follow the rules." I stood there, staring at the mess soaking into my property, the sound of water still hissing from the busted main. Beverly didn't look the least bit concerned. If anything, she looked like she expected a thank you. "You broke a city water line," I said. "That's illegal." She waved her hand. "Oh, please. It's not like anyone's going to arrest me for gardening." I called the water department before I even went inside. They shut off the line within the hour, but the damage was done. My water bill was going to be outrageous. My front yard was ruined, and I had no water inside my house for the night. The next morning, Beverly had the audacity to leave a letter on my doorstep on official HOA letterhead informing me that I was being fined for landscape disruption and unauthorized plumbing alterations. That was it. I wasn't just going to let this slide. I took photos of everything: the pipe, the muddy mess, the shovel marks. I even got a recording from my security cam showing Beverly pointing while her greasy man-child nephew jabbed a shovel into the ground. I called a contractor to fix the pipe, then contacted a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. I called my cousin Adrian, municipal code specialist. She owed me a favor. "You're telling me she authorized an excavation," Adrian said over the phone, "on your private property without a permit?" "Yep," I said. "And then fine me for the damage she caused." "Oh, this is going to be fun." I filed a civil suit that week: property damage, trespassing, and unauthorized utility interference. Beverly didn't even bother to show up at the initial hearing. She sent a statement instead, claiming HOA immunity. But Adrian wasn't having it, and neither was the judge. We got a court order to subpoena HOA records, and what we found made my jaw drop. Turns out Beverly had been issuing fines, approving her own beautification projects, and authorizing neighborhood compliance checks, all without a vote from the board. Half of them didn't even know she was doing it. She'd just been stamping her own approvals like she ran the place. And now I had the legal equivalent of a live wire. On the morning of the hearing, I arrived early with Adrian and a stack of printed evidence thicker than a phone book. She had arranged the documents in color-coded folders, each one tagged with sticky notes and cross-referenced with corresponding sections of the HOA's bylaws. Adrian didn't believe in half measures. Neither did I. Beverly finally showed up 15 minutes late in a powder blue pantsuit and sunglasses, dragging a wheeled briefcase that probably hadn't seen a real file in years. Her nephew trailed behind her, chewing gum like it was a job. The judge didn't even look up until Beverly loudly asked if the court offered coffee. Adrian leaned over and whispered, "She's cooked." We didn't open with the property damage or even the unauthorized excavation. Adrian started with a financial audit. The court order we'd secured had forced the HOA to turn over 5 years of ledgers. What she found wasn't just shady, it was criminal. For example, Beverly had hired her nephew for landscaping consultation services to the tune of over $30,000 across 18 months. No one else on the board had signed off on it. Several of those payments lined up suspiciously close to the dates of known incidents, like when she forced a retired firefighter to remove a flagpole from his yard under threat of patriotic overexpression fines, which weren't listed in any section of the bylaws. Then there were the checks written to entities that didn't exist. One was issued to Suncrest Compliance Solutions, supposedly for inspections. Adrian tracked the routing number. It belonged to a bank account under Beverly's maiden name. When Adrian presented that, Beverly blinked rapidly but didn't say a word. The courtroom got real quiet. The judge leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "You're telling me," he said, "that the vice president of the HOA created a shell company to funnel funds from mandatory community dues into a personal account?" Adrian nodded. "We have the bank records, sir, and we've also contacted the city's Department of Neighborhood Affairs. There have been multiple complaints tied to this HOA over the past 2 years, all under her administration." The judge called a recess. Beverly didn't wait. She marched out into the hallway, her heels clicking like gunshots. I followed. I couldn't help it. She spun around as soon as she heard me behind her. "This is harassment." "No," I said. "This is accountability. You used your position to punish people, steal from your neighbors, and damage private property. You're lucky we didn't press criminal charges for fraud on top of everything else." Her nephew stepped forward, trying to puff himself up, but Adrian appeared at my side and raised an eyebrow. "You might want to sit down," she said to him. "You're named in the civil complaint for unlawful excavation and acting under false authority. You were never licensed to do any work on utilities, and your aunt never had the power to authorize it." He deflated faster than a leaky bounce house. We went back in for the second half of the hearing. This time, the judge didn't wait for formalities. He ordered an immediate injunction against Beverly, barring her from making any further decisions or representing the HOA in any capacity. Then he referred the financial misconduct to the district attorney's office. That was the first domino. Within a week, the city launched a formal investigation. Members of the HOA board, now aware they'd been sidelined for years, called an emergency meeting and voted to dissolve Beverly's position entirely. They also froze the HOA's accounts pending a third-party audit. Adrian filed for damages on my behalf, citing not just the repair costs, but also the financial strain from not having water for 2 days and the long-term lawn restoration. The court awarded me full restitution, plus an additional settlement for emotional distress. But the real payoff came 2 weeks later at the community town hall. The HOA had called a public forum to address the fallout, and it was packed. Residents who hadn't attended a meeting in years were standing shoulder to shoulder in the rec center gym. Every chair was taken. Someone had even brought a projector to display scan documents from the investigation. The acting president, a quiet retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Delaney, stepped up to the mic. "We've uncovered extensive misuse of HOA funds, false fines, and unlawful actions. We're here to propose new bylaws that limit unilateral power and require quarterly audits." Beverly sat in the back row with her arms crossed. Her nephew was nowhere to be seen. Then something unexpected happened. One by one, neighbors began standing up to share their own stories. A nurse named Candace talked about being fined $500 for having a non-regulation welcome mat. A veteran named Mr. Ortega described being harassed over a wheelchair ramp he installed for his late wife. Even the Johnsons, who were usually the most private people on the block, explained how they were threatened with foreclosure over a clerical error in their dues. Every story painted the same picture. Beverly had ruled with intimidation, invented rules, and punished dissent. When it was my turn, I didn't even need to say much. I walked up to the mic, held up a photo of my flooded yard, and simply said, "This is what happens when one person thinks they're above the community they're supposed to serve." Applause broke out. Not polite clapping, real, sustained applause. By the end of the night, the HOA voted to implement a rotating leadership council, eliminate fines without board approval, and allow independent mediation for disputes. They even thanked Adrian publicly and offered to pay her for her time. She declined, but I could tell she appreciated the gesture. As for Beverly, the last I heard, she was being investigated by the city's fraud unit. Her bank accounts were frozen, and someone said her property was being appraised for seizure to cover restitution. The lavender-scented tyranny was over. I didn't celebrate with champagne or fireworks. I stood on my newly reseeded lawn, hose in hand, watering the fresh grass growing where the crater used to be. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming something that had been taken without permission, peace. And from the way my neighbors waved as they walked by, I knew we'd all earned it. 2 weeks after the town hall, I got a letter from the city inspector's office. It wasn't a bill or a citation. It was a request for a formal statement, accompanied by an affidavit outlining the city's investigation into multiple counts of municipal fraud. Beverly's actions had triggered more than just neighborhood reforms. She had violated public infrastructure codes and falsified compliance paperwork, which legally opened the door for criminal prosecution. I called Adrian as soon as I read it. "They're going after her hard," I said. "They have to," she replied. "Falsifying utility permits and rerouting HOA funds into a private account. That's not just unethical, that's federal wire fraud, Keith." And the moment she touched city property without authorization, she crossed into criminal territory. By the following Monday, Beverly's name appeared in a public court docket. She was facing 5 counts: misappropriation of community funds, fraudulent use of city permits, reckless endangerment to public utilities, obstruction of HOA governance, and impersonation of a municipal officer. And that last one, that was the nail in her lavender coffin. Apparently, during her little beautification projects, she had presented herself to utility contractors as a liaison from the city's neighborhood development division. She even carried a fake badge, one she allegedly printed herself using an old template from a defunct community outreach program. It turned out my pipe wasn't the first one she'd ruptured. A retired couple on the next block had their irrigation system destroyed the previous spring, and Beverly had claimed it was due to code violations. They had no idea they could contest it, so they paid for the damage themselves. When investigators visited them after reviewing my case file, the couple handed over photos of Beverly's clipboard complete with a forged city seal. I didn't even know how deep things went until Officer Delgado from the local precinct showed up at my door with a clipboard and body cam. "I'm not here to ask about your lawsuit," he said. "This is separate. We're building a criminal case and your testimony's crucial." I walked him through every detail: how she trespassed, how she refused to acknowledge the damage, how she issued a fine on top of it without board review. He asked to see my security footage again. I burned a fresh copy to a drive and handed it over. Before leaving, Delgado paused on my porch. "You know," he said, "we've had our eyes on this HOA for a while. Couple of officers in the department live in the neighborhood over." Word gets around. 3 days later, Beverly was arrested. It wasn't a quiet affair. She was cuffed outside the community garden during what was supposed to be a seasonal planning walkthrough. Her gardening gloves were still on when they read her the charges. Someone caught it on video, and within hours, it was circulating on the neighborhood message board. The moment she was led to the black and white cruiser, you could practically hear the collective exhale across the subdivision. The interim HOA board wasted no time. They initiated an emergency bylaw amendment banning any single member from issuing citations, hiring contractors, or initiating projects without a recorded board vote and third-party oversight. They also voted to bring in a forensic accountant to assess 5 years' worth of financial activity. It didn't stop there. A group of homeowners led by Mr. Ortega and Candace petitioned the city to audit the HOA's compliance with local and state statutes. When the petition cleared the required signatures in just 3 days, a formal audit was launched. What it found was staggering: over 75 unapproved citations, 32 unauthorized bank transfers, and 9 incidents of falsified documentation. That's when the feds stepped in. Since Beverly had used the Postal Service to send out fake compliance notices with fraudulent penalties, her actions triggered federal mail fraud statutes. The Department of Justice filed additional charges. The community was stunned. No one had imagined that the woman who once handed out cookies during the 4th of July parade had been laundering money through HOA fines and weaponizing fake authority like it was monopoly money. Adrian was contacted by the U.S. Attorney's Office to provide documentation. She didn't charge for her time. She said seeing Beverly face actual consequences was pay enough. Meanwhile, the neighborhood underwent a quiet transformation. People started repainting their mailboxes in colors other than the mandatory beige Beverly had enforced. Someone even installed a tiny bird bath shaped like a dragon in their front yard, an act that would have earned a citation in the old regime. Now it was just another piece of charm on the block. The interim board also established a neighborhood advocacy committee. Their job was to review the cases of residents previously fined or penalized under Beverly's reign. Dozens of people were reimbursed. Citations were voided. A few had their credit scores repaired after Beverly's fake liens were officially declared null and void. One evening, I got a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Delaney holding a clipboard and a small box. "We're nominating you for the new committee," she said. "You stood up when the rest of us didn't know we could." I didn't hesitate. I joined. At our first meeting, we reviewed the case of a veteran who hadn't been allowed to park his utility trailer in his driveway for more than 2 hours. Beverly had fined him repeatedly, even threatened to impound the trailer. We overturned every citation and passed a motion allowing short-term driveway storage with no penalty. We weren't just undoing her damage. We were building something better. The most surreal moment came a month later when I was asked to speak at a civic conference downtown. Turns out, the city wanted to use our neighborhood as a case study for how unchecked HOA authority could spiral into criminal enterprise. I stood at the podium in a room full of city council members and homeowner reps and laid it out, not with anger, not with vengeance, with clarity. "Accountability starts the moment you give someone power," I said. "And if you don't build in a way to check that power, someone like Beverly will find a way to exploit it." Afterward, a council member approached me. "We're drafting a bill," she said. "Statewide HOA reform." Your case might be the catalyst. The irony wasn't lost on me. Beverly had tried to dominate a neighborhood, and in the end, she changed the laws of an entire state. Her trial began a few weeks later. I didn't attend every day, but I showed up when Adrian testified. She laid out the paper trail like a surgeon, precise, relentless, and irrefutable. Beverly tried to claim ignorance, said she never meant harm, but the email chains, the forged documents, and the video footage told a different story. She was convicted on all counts. Sentenced to 5 years, with restitution ordered to the community fund and all affected residents. Her assets were liquidated, including the ornate fountain she'd installed in her yard with HOA money. The same fountain she once claimed was a symbol of unity. After the sentencing, I walked past her house. The fountain was gone. The yard was overgrown. A "for sale" sign leaned crookedly near the curb. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something better, free, not just me. The whole neighborhood. We'd turned the page. And this time, the chapter wasn't about control, but cooperation and trust, the kind that doesn't need a badge or a title. Just a neighbor who's willing to say, "This isn't right," and a few more who are ready to stand beside them. The first time I saw the new HOA board in action, it was on a Saturday morning. They'd set up folding chairs and a collapsible canopy in the greenbelt near the playground. No podiums, no formal agendas, just a long table with water pitchers, open notebooks, and a handmade sign that read "Community Input Meeting." What used to be monthly confrontations behind closed doors had transformed into open forums with real conversations. A dozen residents showed up, then 2 dozen. By the end, there were close to 40 people, all listening, asking questions, and more importantly, being heard. The head of the new board, a quiet but sharp guy named Theo Rains, spent most of the meeting jotting notes and flipping through color-coded folders. He'd been a systems analyst before retiring, and it showed in the way he approached the HOA's mess like a broken operating system. Diagnose every faulty process, isolate the corruption, and replace it with something that actually worked. After the meeting, Theo approached me while I was helping stack chairs. "Keith," he said, offering a handshake, "there's a matter you should be aware of. We discovered something in the course of the audit." I'd rather not explain it over email. I followed him to his car, where he pulled a locked file box from the trunk and handed me a folder labeled Phase 2 Municipal Discrepancies. Inside were scanned documents, permits Beverly had filed under the HOA's name that didn't match any approved neighborhood projects. One in particular stood out. It was a demolition permit filed 3 months before she had dug up my yard. She applied to the city for permission to remove an unauthorized structure obstructing utility access, Theo said. "But the coordinates listed point to your property." "She pretended my home was a public hazard," I said, flipping through the pages. "She planned it months in advance." "She listed herself as the acting municipal liaison," he added. "It's the same title she used in the forged badge case." But this time, it went through. I stared at the approval stamp. "So the city thought they were approving a public safety measure," Theo nodded. "And because she used the HOA's EIN number and filed under a community infrastructure code, it bypassed routine inspection. They thought it was a sidewalk repair. That explained the speed and confidence with which she'd ordered her nephew to dig. She believed she had airtight cover. What she didn't anticipate was that someone would eventually connect the fraudulent permit to an actual crime scene." I drove straight to the precinct and handed over the folder. Officer Delgado met me in the lobby, pulled me into a side room, and started scanning each page with a document reader. "We were waiting on this," he said. "City planning was dragging their feet. This proves she falsified documentation to manipulate a public permit process. That's a direct violation of state infrastructure codes." "What's the penalty?" "Minimum sentence is 7 years, he said without looking up. "And that's before we factor in intent to cause property damage. With this, we might be able to charge her with conspiracy to commit fraud against a public agency." I left the precinct with a strange, heavy clarity. Beverly hadn't just been power-hungry, she'd been strategic, methodical, and willing to compromise public safety to maintain control. And now, she was finally being prosecuted for it. 2 weeks later, I was subpoenaed to testify in the second trial. This one was larger, held in the county courthouse downtown. The courtroom had a gallery with over 50 chairs, most of them filled. Several reporters sat in the back, scribbling notes. A pair of city attorneys took the lead on the case, this time charging Beverly with criminal conspiracy, falsification of government documents, and willful endangerment of municipal infrastructure. When I took the stand, they asked me to describe in detail how I discovered the broken pipe, what I witnessed, and how I later learned about the permit tied to my property. I kept my voice steady, even when I saw Beverly sitting at the defendant's table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles looked bloodless. But what really sealed the case wasn't my testimony, it was the city's digital permit log. A forensic IT specialist showed how Beverly's login had been used to access restricted municipal forms using a bypass code she wasn't authorized to have. That code had only ever been issued to certified city contractors. When asked how she obtained it, Beverly refused to answer. The jury didn't take long. They returned a unanimous guilty verdict on all counts. When the judge read her sentence, allowed 10 years in state prison, with no possibility of early release, there was no applause, no cheers. Just a deep, communal exhale, like the last poison breath had finally left the lungs of our neighborhood. The house she once ruled from sat empty for months. The bank seized it to cover restitution, then sold it at auction. The new owners were a young couple, both elementary school teachers. They planted sunflowers in the front yard and put up a small handmade plaque that read, "Welcome, friends." I dropped off a basket of fresh bread and a note that simply said, "Glad you're here." By summer, our neighborhood looked and felt different. Not in flashy ways, no massive renovations or grand events, just subtle, lasting shifts. People left their garage doors open a little longer to chat. Kids played hopscotch on sidewalks that used to be patrolled for chalk residue. And for the first time in years, the community garden had more vegetables than complaints. The new HOA board finalized a charter amendment that limited board terms to 2 years and required all meetings to be recorded and posted publicly. They also added a transparency clause. Any financial activity exceeding $1,000 had to be reviewed by a third-party accountant and approved by at least 60% of homeowners. Theo asked me to lead the neighborhood mediation panel. At first, I hesitated. I'd spent enough time fighting battles, but then I realized maybe that was exactly why I should say yes. At our first session, we helped resolve a dispute between two neighbors over a boundary shrub. No fines, no threats, just a compromise and a handshake. One of them brought lemonade the next week. One afternoon, I walked past the old rec center and saw a mural being painted along its side wall. It was a collage of neighborhood scenes: kids riding bikes, people waving from porches, a barbecue, a row of different colored mailboxes. In the center was a large tree with deep roots, its branches stretching across the wall. Beneath it, in hand-lettered script, were the words, "We grow stronger together." I didn't need to see my own story painted on the wall. I already saw it in the way my neighbors looked at each other in trust, not in fear. In the way problems were solved with conversation, not citations. In the fact that not one single person asked to bring back the old rules. And when I stood on my porch at dusk, listening to the quiet hum of a neighborhood finally at peace, I knew we'd done more than win a lawsuit. We'd built something far more lasting. We'd taken back our home.